Hello there! I had an incredibly interesting conversation lately, at least in my opinion, with Ondrej and Robert from ESET. We talked about how researchers figure out who attacked whom. After all, it can't always be Russians, right? Well, this times it will be the Russians. After the episode, I asked you in a poll on the community page which ESET Research report you'd like to learn more about, and you clearly choose the Gamaredon campaign against Ukraine. And just to clarify, this isn't a sponsored episode. I got paid for the last one, but I'm not taking anything for this one. I'm just fulfilling a promise I made. So, let's go! When we think about APT groups, a certain image probably pops into our minds automatically. We picture cyber-spies sitting not necessarily in basements, but maybe even on the top floors of skyscrapers in Moscow. They have access to high-end technologies and unlimited resources, which allows them to do just about anything. They have 0 days, they attack power plants, refineries, or ministries of countries that are their enemies. It's the intelligence community's crème de la crème. However, that's not always the case, because there also is Gamaredon. That's the name given to a Russian cyber campaign that is different from all others. Why? One of the other names it has been given, Primitive Bear, might suggest the answer, because as it turns out, you don't always need to be sophisticated to achieve your goals. You don't even have to hide exceptionally well. You just need to go all in and not around. But a simple or even crude campaign doesn't equate to being faultless and amateurish, because as it turns out, it's the most active campaign associated with Russia and aimed at Ukraine. The Ukrainian intelligence has attributed Gamaredon to the Russian FSB, which stands for Federal Security Service, which is interesting in itself. Typically, Russian APT cyber-espionage groups are linked to the SVR, the Foreign Intelligence Service, the Russian equivalent of CIA, or the GRU, the military intelligence responsible for organizing activities like sabotaging hostile countries. The first signs of Gamaredon's activity date back to around 2013, which was before the annexation of Crimea. Interestingly, the people behind the campaign are most likely located geographically exactly there, in the occupied Crimea, as determined by Ukrainian intelligence through intercepted phone conversation. The goal of the campaign is broad infiltration of the targeted victim's infrastructure in order to gain access to as much information as possible, which is then exfiltrated outside. So it's basically espionage. The cyber intelligence operations are primarily conducted against Ukraine. And by primarily, I mean almost exclusively, because Gamaredon has only a few recorded incidents attacking other countries. This isn't too surprising, but something else makes them really specific. They don't actually care about staying hidden. As soon as they successfully attack the systems of their next victim, they make quite a racket, completely unconcerned about whether they get noticed or not. Instead, they focus heavily on maintaining access and avoiding being blocked. If this seems contradictory for you at first glance, you're not alone. But it is not. I will explain further in a moment. The attacks conducted by Gamaredon, much like a Russian space station,
This is a big problem in the Russian space station.
aren't very sophisticated. However, the attackers compensate for this with constant changes to various elements to deceive automatic detection mechanisms and by infecting as many devices in the targeted organization as possible to make it harder to remove them. But let's start from the beginning. How do they manage to gain the access? Yes, the methods themselves aren't very complicated, and this will be a recurring theme today. Gamaredon uses the simplest tools possible to gain access to someone's infrastructure: phishing. The chosen victim simply receives an email with an attachment in the form of a link file, which is a shortcut, or a HTA file, which is an HTML application. Sometimes this attachment is sent as a compromised archive, and recently even as an inconspicuous file resembling a web page, which may lull the victim's vigilance. This attack is technically referred to as HTML smuggling. No interesting chains of vulnerabilities or zero days are used there. It all relies on some carelessly clicking and launching the attachment. And then, in the background, the next stage of the attack is downloaded, a script called pterosend. By the way, all the tools used by Gamaredon have been dubbed by researchers with names starting with the prefix ptero. I don't know why, I didn't ask. But from now on, if you hear a name starting with that, you'll immediately know which campaign to associate it with. These are mainly scripts written in Visual Basic or PowerShell, so nothing particularly complicated. But it's more about focusing on what works best at the lowest cost, rather than a lack of skills. In the initial stages of developing Gamaredon, SFX archives and things written in C or .NET were also used, but over time, those were phased out. It's clear that trends in the tools being used can be seen not only in startups, but also in APT groups. Alright, but let's get back to the point. What happens next when the victim falls for the attack and runs the attachment from the email? The task of the script running in the background is to download the next stage of the attack, that is, the downloader. Once the downloader is, downloaded to the victim's device, it is launched and retrieves the next, more specialized components necessary to carry out the attack. A good dozen of such downloaders have been discovered, of which has at least a few various versions. Some of these can remain active on compromised device, for example by modifying the system registry so they can be used again in the future. This could be for delivering subsequent attacks or to periodically check with their command for any updates waiting for them. I hope this illustrates the flexibility and pace of changes implemented by Gamaredon's operators. But what happens next? Once comfortable and settled in, it's finally time to start causing trouble. For this purpose, tools from the category of weaponizers are employed, whose role in the next stage of the attack is to take control of as many of the victim's systems as possible. Word documents and USB keys are used to infect systems with the help of additional tools, pterodoc and pterotemplate. The first tool adds something extra to all documents saved on the infected machine. This something is a command to download a malicious script located outside of the organization's network on the attacker's servers. It also targets Word files saved on connected external drives and network resources. Additionally, it modifies system default settings to allow the execution of all scripts without even notifying the user. The attacker hopes that such a document will be forwarded to someone else and opened by them, thus infecting another device. The second tool, pterotemplate, focuses on documents that are yet to be created. It changes the system registry to allow the default execution of all macros and to provide access to the programming interface. Then, it replaces the default Word document template in such a way that from this point on, it includes an additional macro. As a result, every newly created document will also infect the next device upon being opened. However, documents are not everything. Any USB key or other storage device connected to the infected device also becomes a weapon in the attacker's arsenal. This is done by use of the pterolink tool. It waits for the moment someone plugs in an external drive to upload infected files with names that entice the next person to open them. For example, files supposedly containing information about mobilization, usernames and passwords for various services, or adult content. The goal is exactly the same as with email attachments: to get someone who connects such a drive to their computer to run the infected file, and then the process proceeds, as you already know. Interestingly, pterolink doesn't check whether a particular drive has already been dealt with, which means it can be infected repeatedly many times over. Such mechanisms, although uncomplicated and well known for years, allow the malicious software to spread widely throughout the organization and often even beyond it. And once control is established over a significant number of devices in the attacked organization, it's time to move on to the next stage. Once access has been gained and a foothold established, it's time to start taking advantage of it. This begins with gathering all potentially useful information, which is then sent to the CNC servers or command and control servers. For this purpose, Gamaredon uses many types of tools categorized as stealers. First, Pteroscout conducts reconnaissance to understand what system they are dealing with in order to potentially use that information later. This includes details about the operating system, its users, the connected domain, the network environment, and so on. Other tools search for files with interesting extensions in a loop, archives, documents, images, or databases, to subsequently send them to the command server. But this is just the beginning. One of these tools is Pteroscreen, which is tasked with taking screenshots of the victim screen at regular intervals and sending them to the operators to provide insight into many details of the organization's operation. But this isn't the end. There are also Pterosig and Pterogram, which, as you may have already guessed, steal the saved conversation databases from the desktop clients of Signal and Telegram. This data is encrypted, but in the case of Signal, the key is stored on the device, so it's just a matter of finding it and using it. And with Telegram, if someone hasn't manually set an additional password for the local database, you can simply read whatever you want, and that's it. So, as you can see, these aren't any outstanding technical protections that are impossible to bypass. Should we then avoid using native apps and do everything through the browser? Unfortunately, that's not a safe option either, because the next tool, Pterobleed, extracts data from applications running in the browser. But not all applications. It's limited to WhatsApp, Telegram, and certain well-known applications used by Ukrainian military or state institutions known to Russian intelligence. Browsers are excellent targets for attack. Therefore, next Pterosteal and Pterocookie steal data saved in all popular browsers from Chrome to Edge to Opera and Firefox. Their targets include usernames, passwords, tokens, cookies, and so on. Although this information is stored in an encrypted form, it doesn't change much. Just like with Signal and Telegram, keys for decrypting this data are also stolen. The last two stealers also access data from email clients, Outlook and the BAT, which I haven't seen in years. They extract credentials for email accounts along with all server settings, which allows for insight into all the correspondence or sending emails with infected attachments from trusted addresses. The collected data is then sent to Russian operators. Before being sent, it's encrypted, though in a rather simplistic way. It is just XORed with the hard drive identifier of the computer from which it originated. To avoid sending the same thing multiple times, a database of hashes for the sent files is created, which also includes the date of the last modification. In some variants, external drives, both network and those connected via USB, are also checked. To mitigate the risk of detaching an external drive with some interesting data on it before sending, the files are immediately copied to a local folder on the machine. Therefore, they can safely wait for their turn to be sent out into the world. Again, no one is bothering to wait until night falls to avoid being noticed. Connection confirmed? Send it. And if someone finds out, well, they just did. So what? Over time, the tool has added various obfuscation methods and changed its persistent behavior. All file names, variables, and folders it uses are also regularly changed to make detection more difficult. But in essence, not much really changes. It just changes often. However, it's not always just about simple theft. Sometimes access from the outside is also useful. Therefore, Gamaredon also has backdoors and tools that create a proxy server on the compromised machine in its arsenal. However, these are used quite sporadically, likely only as a last resort or in the case of particularly interesting targets. Of course, these are not all the tools that Gamaredon uses. The vast majority of them are written in PowerShell and Visual Basic and are completely proprietary. However, there are also some that are partially based on publicly available code found on GitHub. Generally, these tools are quite well obfuscated, using a variety of methods and sometimes multiple ones at once to hinder detection and further analysis. Furthermore, the techniques evolve over time and continually change. The IP addresses of the CNC servers also change several times a day to avoid the blocking of specific location. The same applies to the domains. Initially, a mass of bulk registered domains was used for communication between the infected devices and the CNC servers. But over time, a better solution was found. This solution is based on Telegram, where the downloader simply checks a predefined channel automatically for further instructions, including the IP addresses it should connect to. A similar approach is used with Telegraph, which is Telegram's publishing tool, allowing access to content without having to check the channels. But that's not all. Western tools like Google Domains and Cloudflare are also utilized, for instance, by relaying the appropriate addresses through DNS configuration records. The attackers have even found a way to handle the situation in case the security team on the victim's side blocks all these options during the ongoing attack. The worm stores the IP addresses locally on the infected device, either in the form of a file in the temporary directory or hard-coded in the code. And at that point, we could even disable all DNS, but if we're unaware of this, the worm will still be able to communicate with its command until the internet connection is completely cut off. Alright, but how do we know that the Russians are behind all of this? Well, I discussed it for an hour and a half recently with Ondrej and Robert from ESET how attribution works, so I encourage you to catch up if you haven't seen it yet. You'll find the link in the corner of the screen, of course. The intelligence part of the attribution was carried out by the Ukrainian CERT. It's no surprise, as Ukraine is the primary target of the attacks. Okay, there have been some isolated attacks aimed at NATO countries, Lithuania, Latvia, Bulgaria or Poland. These occurred in February 2023, but yielded no results. So it's not surprising that they were discontinued. In the case of Ukraine, the targets are mainly government entities, and very broadly at that. Over the course of a year, around 1,000 different machines were attacked, which is quite a significant number for a campaign that is not spread widely to everyone, but rather attempts to target very specific units. What to do and how to live? Not living in Ukraine, the chances of being attacked by Gamaredon are close to zero, at least for now. But of course, this isn't the only threat you may encounter. Note that to be effective, you don't need to possess a significant arsenal of very advanced vulnerabilities. Often, simple scripts are enough. One of the paths to success for criminals is not complexity, but elusiveness, continual changes, even multiple times a day, which really complicates life for defenders. If we add to this decent obfuscation, it becomes really difficult to fight such an opponent. Therefore, the best advice is continuous education. Regular training for all employees on maintaining basic digital hygiene is absolutely essential. Additionally, monitoring everything that happens in the company's infrastructure for anomalies, as well as having proper procedures in place for when you notice something has gone wrong. Because it's not a question of if, but when. Do you want to learn more about Gamaredon, especially regarding technical details? Check out the report prepared by the researchers at ESET. You'll find a link in the description. Let me know in the comments down below if you enjoyed this more technical analysis and if you voted for this episode in the poll. I appreciate all your feedback. And that's all for today, folks. Thank you for your attention and see you next time.